In 2 weeks, a stranger would arrive to make her his wife. Of 1887 was the hottest anyone in Copper Springs could remember. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets, on the wooden storefronts, and on the heart of Clara Whitmore as she stood at the fence of her father's property, watching the cattle graze in the distance. But she wasn't really seeing the cattle. She was seeing him, Elijah Stone, riding across his land, his silhouette against the burning orange sky like something painted by God himself. She had loved him since she was 16 years old, when he'd pulled her from the swollen creek during the spring floods. He'd been 20 then, all broad shoulders and calloused hands, with eyes the color of whiskey in firelight. He'd carried her to safety without saying a word, and when he'd set her down on solid ground, he'd touched her cheeks so gently she thought she might have imagined it. "You be careful now, Miss Whitmore," he'd said. "This world would be a darker place without you in it." 7 years had passed since that day, and Clara had loved him through every single one of them. She loved him through the drought that nearly destroyed his ranch. She loved him through the winter his mother passed, and she'd brought him soup that he'd barely touched. She loved him through every Sunday at church, when he'd tip his hat to her, and she'd pretend her heart wasn't shattering into 1,000 pieces, because he never said anything more. "Clara!" Her mother's sharp voice cut through the evening air like a knife. Clara turned reluctantly from the fence, her calico dress swirling around her ankles as she walked back toward the house. The whitewashed walls glowed pink in the sunset, and for a moment, she could almost pretend everything was beautiful. But she knew what waited inside. She knew about the letter that had arrived 3 days ago, the one her father had read with a growing smile, while her mother clasped her hands together in delight. She knew about the arrangement that had been made without her consent, without her knowledge, without any consideration for the heart that beat inside her chest. Thomas Mercer was coming from St. Louis. He was wealthy, educated, and connected to some of the most powerful families in Missouri. He had seen a photograph of Clara at a business meeting with her father and had expressed interest in taking her as his wife. Just like that, with the coldness of a cattle transaction, her future had been decided. "You should be grateful," her father had said when she'd wept. "Mercer can give you things I never could. A fine house, servants, security." But Clara didn't want fine houses or servants. She wanted calloused hands and whiskey-colored eyes. She wanted to wake up to the smell of prairie grass and fall asleep to the sound of coyotes singing in the distance. She wanted Elijah Stone, even though he had never once told her he wanted her too. The next morning, Clara did something she had never done before. She saddled her horse before dawn and rode to the Stone Ranch, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it echoing in her ears. The property wasn't grand, a modest cabin, a weathered barn, fences that needed mending, but to Clara, it was the most beautiful place on earth because he was there. She found him by the well, drawing water for the horses. He looked up when he heard her approach and something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper that he quickly buried beneath that stoic expression he always wore. "Miss Whitmore." He set down the bucket and wiped his hands on his trousers. "Everything all right at your father's place?" "No," Clara said, dismounting with more determination than grace. "Nothing is all right, and I don't know that it ever will be again." Elijah's brow furrowed. He took a step toward her, then stopped himself, as though some invisible barrier stood between them that he dared not cross. "What's happened?" "My father has arranged for me to marry." The words tasted like ash on her tongue. "A man from St. Louis, a stranger. He arrives in 2 weeks, and the wedding will be held the following Sunday." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara watched Elijah's face for some sign, any sign, that this news affected him. His jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists at his sides. But his expression remained carved from stone, and Clara felt her hope begin to crumble. "I see," he said finally. "I wish you happiness, Miss Whitmore." "Happiness?" Clara's voice broke, How can you wish me happiness when you're sending me to my grave? Because that's what this is, Elijah. A slow death. Every day spent with a man I don't love, pretending to be something I'm not, withering away until there's nothing left of the woman I was meant to be. Clara. It was. The first time he'd used her Christian name, and it fell from his lips like a prayer. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. She moved closer, close enough to see the tiny scar above his left eyebrow, close enough to smell the leather and sage that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. I'm saying that I love you. I've loved you since I was 16 years old, and I will love you until the day I die, whether I'm married to another man or not. Tell me you don't feel the same and I'll leave. I'll marry Thomas Mercer and never speak of this again. But if you do feel it, if there's even a small piece of your heart that belongs to me, please, Elijah, please don't let them take me away. For a long, terrible moment, Elijah simply stared at her. Then something in him seemed to break, like a dam finally giving way to the relentless pressure of the water behind it. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the tears that had begun to fall down her cheeks. I have loved you every day for 7 years, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I have loved you from afar because I had nothing to offer you. No money, no future. Nothing but this broken-down ranch and a name that means nothing to anyone. Your father would never have accepted my suit, and I would never have shamed you by asking you to lower yourself. Lower myself? Clara laughed through her tears. Elijah Stone, you are the finest man I have ever known. You are kind and brave and true. You work this land with your own 2 hands, and you owe nothing to anyone. That is worth more to me than all the money in St. Louis. He kissed her then, and the world fell away. His lips were warm and gentle, reverent almost, as though she were something precious that he was afraid to break. Clara wound her arms around his neck and pulled him closer, desperate to make up for 7 years of longing in a single moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Elijah pressed his forehead to hers. I won't let them take you, he promised. I don't know how, but I'll find a way. But finding a way proved more difficult than either of them had imagined. When Clara returned home, her father was waiting with thunder in his eyes. Someone had seen her riding toward the Stone Ranch and had reported back, as people in small towns always did. You will not see that man again, William Whitmore declared. Do you understand me? Elijah Stone has nothing, no prospects, no future, no standing in this community. Thomas Mercer can give you everything. Everything except love, Clara shot back. Everything except happiness. Love is a luxury for the poor, her father said coldly. Those of us with means must think practically. This marriage will secure our family's future. The drought nearly ruined us, Clara. Do you understand that? Without Mercer's investment, we could lose everything. The ranch, the house, all of it, gone. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. You're selling me to pay your debts? Her father's face reddened. I'm giving you an opportunity that most women would kill for. You will marry Thomas Mercer, and you will learn to be content. The days that followed were a special kind of torture. Clara was watched constantly, never allowed to leave the property unaccompanied. Her mother began preparations for the wedding with an enthusiasm that felt like betrayal, prattling on about dress fabrics and flower arrangements, while Clara sat in stony silence. But Elijah had not forgotten his promise. On the 5th night, Clara heard a soft tapping at her window. She opened it to find him below, standing in the moonlight, with his hat in his hands and his heart on his sleeve. Come with me, he whispered. Tonight, we'll ride to the next county, find a preacher who'll marry us proper. By the time they realize you're gone, it'll be too late. Clara's heart soared and plummeted in the same instant. My father will come after us. He'll bring the sheriff. He'll say you took me against my will. Then we'll run farther. California, maybe. There's land there, opportunity. We can start fresh, build something new. Elijah's eyes burned with desperate hope. I know I'm asking you to give up everything, your family, your home, the only life you've ever known. But I'm offering you my whole heart, Clara. It's not much, but it's yours. It's always been yours. She looked down at him. This man who owned nothing but the clothes on his back and a struggling ranch. This man who was willing to risk everything for her. And she knew what her answer would be. Wait for me by the old oak tree at the edge of town, she said. Give me an hour. She gathered only what she could carry. A change of clothes, her grandmother's wedding ring, the leather journal where she had written about Elijah for years, without ever believing she would actually be his. She left a note for her mother, knowing it would break her heart, but hoping that someday, somehow, she would understand. The ride to the old oak tree was the longest of Clara. Life. Every shadow seemed threatening, every sound a potential danger. But when she saw Elijah's silhouette against the moonlit sky, all her fear melted away. This was right. This was destiny. They rode through the night, pushing their horses as hard as they dared. By dawn they had crossed into the next county, and by the following evening they stood before a minister in a tiny whitewashed church, pledging their lives to each other. The ceremony was simple. No flowers, no music, no guests to witness their union. But when Elijah slipped her grandmother's ring onto her finger and promised to love her until death and beyond, Clara felt richer than any St. Louis socialite could ever hope to be. News traveled slowly in those days, but it traveled. Within a month, word reached them that Thomas Mercer had returned to St. Louis in a rage, and that William Whitmore had publicly disowned his daughter. The pain of her father's rejection cut deep, but Elijah was there to hold her through the tears, to remind her that family could be chosen as well as born. They settled on a small plot of land in California's Central Valley where the soil was rich and the future seemed limitless. The first years were hard, harder than Clara had ever imagined. There were droughts and floods, failed crops and lean winters. There were nights when they had nothing to eat but hope and each other. But there was also joy. There was the miracle of watching their first field of wheat turn golden in the summer sun. There was the sound of their daughter's first cry, and later, their son's, filling the small cabin with life and laughter. There were Sunday mornings when Clara would wake to find Elijah Watt, ching her with such tenderness that she would forget all the hardships and remember only how blessed she was. Years passed, as years do. The small cabin grew into a proper farmhouse. The struggling plot of land became a prosperous ranch. Clara's hair turned gray, and Elijah's hands grew weathered with age, but the love between them only deepened, like a river carving its way through stone. One autumn evening, when the children had grown and gone and the house was quiet, Clara and Elijah sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over their land. He reached for her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers in that familiar way that still made her heart skip after all these years. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Leaving everything behind?" Clara looked at him, at the lines around his eyes, at the silver in his hair, at the face she had loved for more than half her life. She thought about the fine house in St. Louis that might have been hers, the servants and the society parties, and the empty, loveless existence she had so narrowly escaped. "Never," she said, "not for a single moment." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Clara leaned her head against her husband's shoulder and thanked God for the courage he had found that night so long ago. The courage to choose love over security, passion over practicality, the rancher over the stranger. Because in the end, that choice had made all the difference. It had given her a life filled with meaning, a partner who was also her best friend, and a love story that would be told for generations. Not a story of wealth or status, but something far more precious, a story of two hearts that had found each other against all odds and had never let go. The Old West was a hard place, unforgiving and often cruel, but it was also a place where miracles happened, where ordinary people did extraordinary things. and where love, true love, could conquer even the most impossible obstacles. Clara knew this because she had lived it, had breathed it, had built her entire life upon its foundation, and as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, she smiled, knowing that if she had to do it all over again, she would make the same choice 1,000 times. Because some loves are worth everything. Some loves are worth the whole world. Hers was.